Okay, so my boys V3 Esports just got slapped in playoffs by Sengoku Gaming in the first round of playoffs that they have played in since 2021. So I think it's time we make this painful video. First, I guess we should talk about who V3 Esports are, and to give you guys some background information as to why I like them and why you should care about them failing. V3 Esports are a team owned by Kobe High-Tech School, or Gakko Hojin Kobe Gakuen. They got promoted to LJL with a newly formed roster in the spring of 2018, winning the LJL in spring in 2020, becoming the only team not called DFM that still exists to have won the LJL. They also finished second in 2019 and 2021. Whilst achieving this, they were able to develop a load of talent, with a consistent talent factory in the form of their academy team, which was constantly poached and developed talents like Marble, Yuzhou, Recap, Kokog, and even one of the GOATs of Japan, Paz. Outside of League of Legends, in much less degenerate games, they have represented Japan at the Apex Legends Global Series Finals, the game's top tournament, and they are a regular fixture in the PUBG scene for years as well. So you can see that whilst they are a smaller org within Japan, they had developed themselves a decent reputation by spring of 2022. Leading up to spring of 2022, V3 had solidified themselves as one of the best orgs in Japanese League of Legends. They had finished third and first in 2020, only ever losing to DFM in the playoffs, and then in 2021 they had finished second and fourth, only stepping up against a striving Axes, who had developed a very, very solid team that involved Honey, Megumin, and Ino, three of the best players in Japan at the time. This meant that many expected them to come into 2022 with maintaining the majority of their squad, with using their go-to academy team, with Marble, Yuzhou, and Hetal coming in, looking to develop alongside their strong first team, which had Kokog, a top player in Japan, Reiner, a solid support, and Ace, the ever-present smart mid laner / coach, who will be featured throughout this video. They had a great roster to build off, and with the correct investment, particularly in import recruitment at mid and jungle, they would comfortably be able to go against DFM and compete at the top of the league. However, the org let go of Kokog, and then let Marble and Reiner go through to Hawks, a team that seemed to be in a solid rebuild phase, and Ace was dropped alongside the rest of the remaining team to bring through their weakened academy team, which had just lost Marble. Losing Marble was the first major mistake. Dress code was not a bad ADC in 2022, especially not for a rookie, but Marble came in and instantly became one of the best ADCs in the league. Meanwhile, dropping Kokog for Washade was a significant downgrade as well. Unica for Mujin wasn't necessarily a significant downgrade, but he was still never going to be good enough to try and win the LJL, but just like Mujin, which is why I suggested bringing in a different import at jungle earlier. Yuzhou for Ace was technically an upgrade, and he could develop well with Ace as his coach, but his playstyle required strong laners elsewhere in the team, as he played a more supportive style. And then Hetal for Reina wasn't a downgrade either. As a whole, this meant the team had mostly got worse in every lane but mid, and even then, Yuzhou was not a significant upgrade on Ace, and his playstyle wouldn't work without a strong team to build around. Despite all this, with a new format making them play each team 3 times, and 6 of the 8 teams making playoffs, there was a strong belief that they could at least do that. However, it was not to be. After week 1, it was inevitable that this team was not going to achieve anything. They had gone 0-7 and lost in sub-25 minute games against Axes, Sengoku, and DFM. They also went on to lose 2 more sub-25 minute games, including a sub-20 minute loss in the final week against DFM. By the end of week 2, it was already a doomed project. The team had gone 0-14 and hadn't looked like winning a single game. While for week 3, there again appeared to be little fight from this team, when on day 18, they lost in around 18 minutes to DFM. However, you might have noticed something about this. You may see that despite going 0-21, there are only 5 sub-25 minute games, and even then, only one is actually only sub-26, and the rest, most of them occurred in the opening week. On top of this, you may also be aware that game time is not always indicative of how competitive a game actually was. Unfortunately for the V3 Esports, however, it kind of was, but the positives they could take away from that was the number of games that they held out for a long time in. They had 6 games that went over 35 minutes, and they came against a variety of teams. In fact, to V3's credit, they actually came against every team but the top 2, and they actually had a very close game against Sengoku Gaming in week 3, which lasted 33 minutes. Now you might ask, if game time is not normally indicative of closeness, why is that the case for V3? And that is quite simple, but also quite complicated. This team had a lot to work on if they even wanted to call themselves LGL players, and you might say, oh well, all rookies have a lot to work on when they join a region's top division. Like Oscar Rinin couldn't lane against top opponents because he was used to playing at the Superliga level. Or maybe they don't know how to set up properly for neutral objectives because fights are a lot scrappier at lower levels. Or maybe it was something a little more advanced, like freezing a wave and when to do it. However, you would be wrong. The team, as a result of Japanese solo queue and academy scrums, knew how to lane against most of the top players, even if they weren't as good as them. They were still never as much of a detriment to the team as Oscar Rinin was to Fnatic when he first joined, unless they played DFM, which is very much understandable. Their setup around Drakes and Barons was better than average, especially for this league, but they were always far too behind, so it never really mattered other than to stall out games, which is why it was indicative of closeness. Tight game time was indicative of closeness. And then, when it came to marginally more complex stuff like freezing the wave, only the top teams in Japan ever really did it at this point. It was only ever really done properly. It was rarely ever done properly anywhere, much to the annoyance of LS, so it never really hurt them. What was shocking was how bad they were at things you'd expect them to pick up from solo queue, such as creative jungle pathing and when to catch another wave versus when to back and buy. Even how to execute proper gank properly. Gank properly, what on earth is that? Obviously, this put them behind in the early game, making late game macro much harder, and so we never really got to see in the ring split whether they understood how to properly siege or how to split push. The following split, however, things picked up. The team managed to pick up not 1, not 2, but 3 wins, against 3 different teams and all in the final week. One thing that might instantly catch your eye with them is the game time, all of which apart from one are very long games. Remember how I said earlier that their good Drake and Barra setup served only to delay their games? Well, it had worked in their favour and got them victories in their second split as a team. Things were looking up. Sure, their 3 wins came against the other bottom 3 teams, but the gap between teams in Japan is very large. The gap from Axis to Burning Core, despite only being 2 games, was massive in terms of skill. And you can see visibly the gap between Rascal Jester and the baseball team. It was a start, and they had improved visibly everywhere across the board. And I, like many other LJL fans, was looking forward to seeing what they could achieve next year, both as individuals and as a team. And then it happened, the 2023 off-season. And you will see here lots of people leaving. But in the end, it was just their call. Well, that's what you think, but you would be wrong. Unica and Yujio were the strongest members of this team. Yujio had left to go and reach his potential as CGA, and Unica had gone to learn under one of the goats of LGL, Hachimecha, and the recruitment to place them was dogshit. HRK and Ace came in. HRK had been bouncing around academies for a while. In fact, he'd first been seen at the 2020 scouting grounds on Team Zorn, where he'd impressed enough to get on 1 split on the bench of Rascal Jester's main team, and 1 split finishing joint last on their academy before being picked up by 3-3's academy, who somehow managed to only scrape a top 4 finish where he did not stand out from the rest of the crowd. In fact, the best player on that team was Ray, who became the sub for Yujio at CGA before becoming Jet's backup at Sengoku. The fact that they couldn't hold on to him when facing that sort of competition sort of shows you how small V3 is. Or does it? Ray was actually still a part of the team when Ace was announced to be moving from coach back into V3's mid lane, leaving some to claim that nepotism may have been at play here. Anyway, nepotism or not, all that's important to note is that this was a significant step back, and it's led them to going winless in 2023 with a series score of 0-21 on the year and a game score of 4-42, before being unceremoniously dumped out by Sengoku Gaming after they were dragged kicking and screaming into the lower bracket by the new format. There was no hope shown by this team all year, and they're going to need a whole new roster, probably built around dress code if they ever want to compete. And so where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a prestigious org absolutely flailing around, going 2 years, sitting directly at the bottom of the feet of one of the worst leagues in League of Legends. And so what they're going to do about it? Well, you'd be surprised to find out there's actually a lot they can do about it, and quite quickly. The first thing they can try as an org is to reinvest into their academy roster again. Their academy roster always has prestigious names, and this year is no different. Enapon and Esman are 2 of the top laners in the league, and Loser is one of the better supports. Whilst the LJ Academy is not the best, building around those players properly if they happen to lose their current top players like dress code could easily work out, especially when you look at other academy options available. You have top players like Yellow Yoshi in the top lane, somehow sitting on academy, and as I said, Unico is technically still in academy, and as is Ray, although it is worth saying that those 3 names that I just listed are all technically subs rather than academy players, but subs always play in academy in LJL because of the limited player pool. So, if we were going to build a realistic roster out of these of the LJL Academy, assuming that V3 lost all their players, who could they pick up? And it's worth saying that this is kind of a likely scenario, because whilst they are owned by the school and theoretically the org they should have a decent amount of money for reinvesting in a roster, they tend to be quite cautious about how much they spend, and they tend to try and make a profit. They are one of the few orgs that are trying to make a profit rather than just going even or building an image. And so it's likely that they'll lose dress code to a better team this season. So who could they build around? As I said earlier, if I was to take the most realistic and best team they can build, starting in top lane. Top lane is probably one of the hardest areas. If they can keep Washade, which I think they should be able to because of the limited interest, I'd probably keep him because he is growing as the years go by, and whilst this will be his third season and he's no longer a rookie, he's still growing and he's still a decent player at the end of the day. And if you can find, unless you can find a better academy, unless you can find a better top laner somewhere in scouting grounds, which is unlikely, that's what I go with anyway. Or unless a cheap option opens up from the LGL itself with the roster shuffles. At jungle, you might want to try and look at Tatsu, Unica, or Funahui, which are 3 very solid options. Tatsu and Funahui are probably the more likely ones, as Unica is technically looking to replace Hachimacha at Fennel at some point. But it's still like something that's worth considering. And then in terms of mid laner, if you can get Ray, unlikely though, if you can get him, not a bad pickup. If not, Enapon is still there, and if he develops under Ace as a coach, because Ace is a better coach than he is a player, then that wouldn't be a bad solution. And then ADC, there's Milan, who's never going to get a game at DFM, so you might be able to loan him from their academy. Esman is also a decent option, but if you can keep dress code, then you should be trying to keep dress code. And then at support, I mean, if they can keep Hetal, which they should be able to do, because I don't think Hetal's going to get a lot of interest, then they might be able to do a little better. To be fair though, this team that I've just formed there with just the suggestions, even if you get the best players available in that, you're still probably only looking at competing for 5th and 6th, but that's a lot better than finishing 8th. So join me as I track them through the pre-season and off-season and talk about all the previous games and losses, because I love watching them and breaking them down, because they do make a lot of basic mistakes. So if you're in like a lower level, or you want to go pro, or you're just interested in learning about how pros do things, watching their games is very, very useful for learning about the basics. So yeah, hopefully you'll see a lot more content about them. There will be a League of Legends updates video coming out tomorrow. It will be recorded tonight after the LEC game. And so look out for that. See you soon. Bye.